Hey everybody, this is Ari in the Air. Welcome back to the channel. Stoked you're here. So my friend Gavin McClurg wrote this awesome book, Advanced Paragliding, with all the lessons that he's learned from the world's best pilots on his Cloud-Based Mayhem podcast. So I figured I'd get Gavin and I together and we could just go over some of the main topics in the book to teach you guys some lessons and to make a video version of some of the best insights from the book. The book is just packed full of things that are so good, and I think that if you're a serious paraglide pilot, you're gonna want this book on your shelf. So just know that what we talk about here is just a small fraction of what's in there. I have a link to buy the book in the description below. I think you guys should check that out. And also, if you like this channel and you appreciate these videos, consider supporting me on Patreon. That's patreon.com/AirInTheAir. I also do paraglide coaching over Zoom. So today we're going to get into thermaling, which is, as Gavin calls it, a dark art. He calls most things in paragliding a dark art because they kind of are. But some good lessons in here. Hope you guys enjoy it. Thanks for being here. Here we go.
See ya.
But I want to start with thermaling. I think that thermaling is likely the most core aspect of paragliding and what so many people coming into the sport really want to learn. And it's also, as you describe it, a dark art. It's a very difficult thing to teach. And I have had my own experience learning it through experience and reading and failing. And so I want to hear from you. What are some of your favorite lessons in this book? What are some of your biggest lessons that you would tell pilots learning to thermal and people who are trying to perfect it? What works for you?
Yeah, I gotta say, this was a part of my flying that was really re-engineered through the podcast. And I didn't realize it at the time, but when you go back and listen to the first 50 shows, I often say something that's completely stupid, that thermaling is easy. And I kept saying that to people who were way better thermalers than I was or may ever be, people like Russ Ogden, who just won the Worlds. And I think he was the first person to really call it out. It just said, yeah, I don't agree with that. I don't think it's easy at all. And it really took that kind of, because I've always felt like gliding is the much harder thing we do. And I still feel that way. You know, when you watch somebody like Kriegel and magic gliding and finding magic lines, I think that's the hardest thing to articulate and teach, and the hardest thing to learn because it's such a just a feel thing. But thermaling, you know, when I really took it on as a, you know, kind of a growth mindset side of things, where I just realized, yeah, I'm actually not that great at this. And when you realize at the comp end of things, you know, the difference in technical ability between the best and the worst is minute. It's tiny. It's 3%. And that 3% makes a huge difference. So you got to get really, really good at it. And, you know, the theme you see over and over in the book, whether it's thermaling, gliding, fear injuries, accidents, all of it is time, right? And, you know, you can't just say, here's what you do to be a good thermaler. That doesn't really work. But some of the stuff that has really helped me is visualization. I just actually put out a little show last night on kind of a 20-minute visualization practice. A lot of the people that I interviewed talk about that. You know, your mind doesn't know the difference between a real experience and a visualized experience. And the top people in the world in whatever their sport, you know, race car driving and downhill skiing, and you name it. And they all visualize, you know, the top of the top, all visualize them succeeding. And as you get better at it, you do it more and more and more in real time. And, you know, so you're feeling the harness, you're feeling the air, you're seeing the birds, you're feeling your brakes, So that's helped me a lot. And something that's not in the book that I just took back from Turkey, so something relevant recently is, I just had quite a good World Cup in Turkey in September, and I was the reason I did well is I was climbing really well, and I was really sitting on top and felt like I was, in many positions where I was kind of controlling the gaggle, and it gives you so much more freedom to make decisions. You're not anxious. You're not trying to catch up. It actually makes it really easy. And as soon as I got on the plane to come home, Josh Cohn, who's in the book, and one of our early guests in the Mayhem said, associate a word with how you were climbing right now. Come up with a word that you used at the time, or that makes sense to you, that you can recall on, that you can bring into that headspace that you garnered there. Because I was also very consistent. I had 5 really good tasks, and which has been, I've never done in a comp. I've never been that consistent. And so my word was calm. I was super calm the whole comp. And that's something you see a lot with the veterans, and you see a lot with the pilots who I interviewed in the show and who are in the book. They all talk about, that the currency and the hours and the training makes you calm. Yeah. And also that you don't, I think there are exceptions to this, like Maxime, sounds like he's pretty emotional about things, and we're all pretty emotional, but I think that when you watch the pilots who are consistent and really good, when they screw up, they at least outwardly don't care. I'm sure inwardly I think they know that, this is just a game.
And they note their mistake, but they don't react to it emotionally.
Exactly. They note their mistake. That I read a lot of books this year going into the X Alps about, mind, you're training your mind for big events and big competitions. And it really helped me to watch Jordan in that most recent documentary, that, he talks about, if a baseball player, for example, or a basketball player, if they get hung up on missing the shot, 30, Jordan's one of the best shooters of all time. Well, he failed 30% of the time. That's a lot of failure. Baseball players fail 70% of the time, and they're one of the best hitters in the world. If they got a 300 batting average, they're really good. That means seven out of 10 times you're going back to the bench. So I really latched onto this, and you can see that theme in the book as well, that we fail a lot. It's all right.
This is,
you got to learn from it, let it go. You have to have a visualization for that, letting it go. You have to have a way where you can throw it in the trash can, put the lid on it, walk away.
That's so interesting, because I think that what I hear is that you've basically just connected such a technical skill as thermaling to a perspective and an emotional state of being, right? That we thermal best when we're calm, is to say, okay, you're going to learn the technical stuff as you have experience, but to open yourself to the maximum amount of growth, the maximum amount of learning, you have to kind of just have the right perspective. You have to be calm, and you have to be patient. Before I did my first competition, luckily I was in close communication with Nick Grease at that point in my life. And he says, Ari, you just have to calm down. You just need to calm down, especially a guy like you. You just need to calm down. He says, we joke that Kriegel takes beta blockers, and
what you need, Swiss, right?
Yeah, totally. You just need to calm down. And so it's interesting to hear that your best comp result came from an emotional, or seemed to be linked to a emotional state of being.
And I mean, I think that, like you said, that when I'm glancing down right now at the chapter on thermaling, Nick Grease is the first one in there, right? I mean, he's one of the best climbers ever. I've always looked at the bottom of his wing, and from the technical side, you have to constantly challenge yourself to be on top of whoever it is. If you're under somebody, you got to figure out how to get on top of them. If you're above them, you never let them climb through you. That's just, that's the most basic core. But what you see over and over again in the book is you got to sample a lot of air. You're never happy with what you got. There's always a better core, and you got to move. When you watch Nick Grease climb, he's constantly pushing out from wider and farther than everybody else. And if it doesn't work, he comes back in. And you have to realize that doesn't destroy your rate of climb hardly at all. You're more than likely going to find something a little bit better, which is hard to make yourself do, especially when you're learning, because you're in a 4-meter climb. How could it be better than this? You're Vario singing. And so that's from the technical side. There's lots of little things like that you get out of the book that I think really help. But for me personally, and I don't remember if that's a big part of the book, is I got better when, you learn the technical side, and then you relax, and then you calm down, and you don't get anxious ever in a good flight. You just, the other big one is that, losing the lead gaggle is not a big deal. That's, it's a long day. It's a long course. Typically, sometimes they're super racy and short, but most of the time it's not a bad place to be a little bit back. It just gives you more information in front of you. And that was also one of those, if you're not in a controlling position, if you're not in an optimal position, then you don't try to get to one by being brave.
Yeah, this is interesting. I think that how we're talking about this is very comp centric, and there is such an enormous benefit to learning, especially thermaling, when you put yourself relative to 100 other pilots.
Yes.
So I think that if you really want to learn to thermal better, getting yourself into a paragliding competition is likely your best bet.
Yeah, there's a lot of information in here about comps. We hear all these cliches all the time. You're going to learn more in a comp in 1 week than you will in an entire year. Again, using Turkey as what I should have said is that it's not necessarily a cliche. I think it's actually pretty true. Yeah. And the main thing that it does is it shows you instantly how good you really are at the technical side of things. There's the strategy and the head space and all the stuff that always goes with flying. But, again, I got to see this in Turkey. I think we had one of the largest U.S. contingents at an international comp ever. There was 12 U.S. pilots there. 9 were in their first World Cup. And I don't want to put words in anybody's mouth, but, a lot of these people were coming from their home site where they're kind of the king of the hill, and they're really good pilots. And they went to Turkey and they really struggled, because they weren't the best climbers. They weren't fast. They made a lot of mistakes, and which is great. This is good stuff. This is good to get humiliated a little bit and be humbled a little bit, and and realize, it's probably pretty easy to do okay. I just lost me there. I don't know what happened. Where's my video? Sorry, bud. There we go. I think it's good to compare yourself with 130 other people in the air. And inevitably, even Kriegel talks about that he's never been a very good climber, and so one of the reasons he really likes to be alone is that in the X-Alps is he doesn't want to double think what he's doing. He wants to be himself. And so when you're with a whole bunch of other pilots, it does make you go, am I doing this right? Should I be there? But it does give you instant feedback on how well you're doing things.
Yeah. And it's so true. And there's a slight delineation that I want to make here, as I have kind of found myself as one of the emotional intelligence in paragliding voices. And there's something just incredibly strong about the way you look at things, like the fact that you want to be humiliated, or just that you talk about it in that way is, I love that. But for a lot of people, I think that getting into their first competition and having all of this information out there, which is basically to say that when you do something, having other pilots around will show you how what you did worked relative to what other people are doing. Okay. And that is an incredibly slippery slope to they are better than me. Right. Yep. And so for me, as I came into flying competitions, especially that I got second place in the first comp I ever did. So then the next comp, I was like, I have this like thing to uphold.
I'm good.
I'm good.
Yeah.
And so the slippery slope that I want to illuminate for people is that by getting into competition and in general, by paragliding around other people, by traveling, by meeting new people, by flying new sites, you will be able to discern how well what you did worked versus what someone else did. But it is a slippery slope to make an identity loop out of that and to call yourself worse, to call yourself better. Because both directions on that are not that calm that you're talking about, right? You weren't on top of the gaggle in Turkey being like, I am the best. I am the best. I am the best. No, that is an unsustainable mindset that is going to lead you to dirt on task 2. But to be calm and to be thinking, okay, what I'm doing is working. What I'm doing is working because what I'm doing is different than who I am. And so in general, I think that paragliding, you know, as Jeff Shapiro says, that we're all emotional players in an emotional game. We got to keep that fact like right in front and center. And I struggle with that because, man, if I start getting out climbed, it's like, I'm an idiot. I'm blowing it. I'm an idiot. And it's like, fuck, you know, there was a task in Chelan this year. I was like 15 feet from your glider and you out climbed me and I landed out and I'm like, motherfucker, like, you know, so,
yeah. And I mean, you know, a lot of people don't make it through that, you know,
yeah,
a ton of pilots, you know, I had the same start to comp flying. And I think it's a really bad way to start. Yeah. I had a ton of early success and wrongly thought I was good. And well, I mean, I was good, but I was a long way from actually knowing how to play that game and spending the time and the training that it actually takes. Everybody, no one is just instantly good at comp flying. It takes a long time. That's what you hear from everybody I've interviewed and everybody in this book. They're all, you know, many of them are very accomplished comp pilots and they all say that, you know, so it's not, you can't short circuit it. You can't shortcut it. But yeah, a lot of folks just can't handle that beat down. It's an emotional beat down. And
yeah. And
what like you're talking about, I'm glad you're pointing it out because you know, those little things, it's a great, you know, one of the greatest tools I learned was from, I think it was from Alex Roby, who's in the book quite a bit too. He's got a whole chapter is, you know, have a journal, have something in your kit where you land. And that's the first thing you do. You know, don't go drink beers yet. Don't get in the retrieve yet. Just take a few minutes. And, you know, if you process that stuff, it helps separate the emotion from the, you know, was it a good decision? You know, there's a lot of things after a flight that you need to think about, and having a little journal is cathartic.
I love that. And it's so interesting how, you know, maybe the best lesson I could give people about thermaling is this perspective thing that like settle in for the long haul, settle in for disappointment, settle in for failure, settle in for like your identity and your own self-worth to be called into question by your own psyche, like all the time. Right. And you and I have very different approaches to this because you bang your head on this over and over. And I think that I have too, but I think I'm just a bit softer than you. And so I just like, I think I've had to take a slightly different route in learning, when it got really hard, when it felt like I was a failure and I was blowing it, I had to like kind of find some other way. And so it's interesting how mental we've gone here as we talk about thermaling. But I want to bring it a little bit more technical here. I want to talk about, um, we talked about searching, this idea that you would never just like think, oh, I found it. Mm. You would actually say, that you would continue looking, or try to core it more perfectly. That's the searching part. But there's also a lot of information in the book about flat turns. Mm. And I want to hear how you manage your glider in a thermal. There's a lot of different ways to do it. It sounds like, it's silly to think about that. There's like, no, flat turns are obvious, but there's actually, as I fly in comps, you see some people use the rear riser, some people use the brake, some people use a combination of weight shift. And there's a lot of people doing a lot of different things. I'd love to hear from you how you manage your glider while you're climbing.
A lot of it with high performance gliders these days and the high aspect gliders is letting the wing do the work. Mark, not Mark, Marco, who lives down in Valle now, really accomplished Czech pilot. He's got a big segment right here that I'm looking at in the book that, he talks about every time you touch your glider, you're lessening its performance, right? So when you touch your brakes or you touch your B's when you're on glide, you're losing performance, so we got to stay off those things and let them do what they're good at doing. And when it comes to thermaling, especially if it's light, if it's a light climb or it's a low save, what Nick says is totally correct. We want to be as flat as we possibly can. And how I visualize that is sailplanes and hang gliders. Mm-hmm. They can't turn as tight as we can turn. So we don't need to turn as tight as we normally think. And we need to keep the fabric over our heads super flat, and which means and be turning with the least amount of input possible. And so for the most part, now this changes if it's a really strong climb, but for the most part, most climbs are in that kind of point something to 2.5, right? It's on those good days, especially here in the Intermountain West, where we can start really banking it up and try to stay in a core that's rising a lot faster, which allows us to make more mistakes, but then you can really bank it up. But below that, I'm trying to keep it as flat as I possibly can. And that's usually a combination for me of outside weight shift, usually no input on the outside side, and as little brake as I can get away with to turn. And so, and especially if I'm low, I'm in a different mindset there.
Inside weight shift there?
Outside. Did I say inside? No, outside. Outside weight shift and inside brake.
Really?
Yeah. So, just to keep the glider flat, because if you inside weight shift and inside brake, you're going to bank, right? So I'm basically turning a circle with keeping my glider as flat as I possibly can. And that holds true even as it starts to get stronger and stronger. The outside weight shift will be less and less. But, obviously you're being very careful not to spin your glider. You're keeping things pressurized, but I'm basically really thinking about, the three aspects we can get our glider in: roll and access and yaw. And I'm just trying to stay perfectly under my wing and perfectly flat.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I think that you're like what you think about that you're doing, that you're trying to keep it as flat as possible, is exactly what I think about as well. But I have a very different mechanical technique. I try to use a lot of inside weight shift so that I don't have to use inside brake. And I just try to like carve the glider just through weight shift, because I feel like if I'm just weight shifting the glider, then it is going to carve as naturally as it can. And I don't actually have to use the inside brake much to turn the glider. But yeah, staying off the outside brake as much as you can is also what I do. But, as much as you can here is so important, because that doesn't mean that you're underhandling your glider. I think that it's really important to note that as little as you can is as little as you can and properly control the glider. Any extra pitch, any extra roll, any extra yaw that the glider takes that it shouldn't is a loss of efficiency. So you actually want to use not a heavy hand and not a light hand, but just right.
Just the right hand. Yes.
Just the right hand, which is a delicate thing that only comes through experience. But, I think that I've seen a lot of people who trying to be efficient translates to underhandling their glider.
Yeah, and interesting. I haven't tried the just leaning aspect. I will do that a lot when it's super light. Maybe it's the end of the day or early morning, especially in the X Alps. I'll just close my eyes and just feel and just try to let the glider take me. I'll try to feel on my cheeks. Okay, it's a slightly warmer on my right hand side, or it's slightly warmer on my left hand side. I'll try to really hear the air. I don't really understand these folks that can fly with any kind of music on their flight deck and stuff. I really try to hear everything going around me, but the gliders are pretty good at pulling you into it. And so yeah, now that I come to think of it, I do kind of do your technique early, but I've never tried that as a way to consistently thermal. That's a great thing to try.
Well, there's this thing where if you outside weight shift and inside brake, you actually raise the spin speed of your glider, right?
For sure.
So I tell people to coordinate their weight shift and their brake input for safety. Because if you're weight shifting on the side that you're brake inputting, then the chance that you spin the glider is much lower. You have to have a much bigger input to spin the glider if your weight is on that side. And if you opposite weight shift and unload that side, then the glider spins at a lot higher speed. So for safety's sake, I tell people to coordinate their weight shift and their brake input.
Absolutely. This is I think more of an advanced flying technique that you don't teach people out of the blocks, for sure. And I always need to be careful with audio where you don't have a visual. When I'm saying outside weight shift, the overall shift is pretty tiny, even in a big climb. In fact, if you saw me head on, it would probably look like I'm pretty centered. It's just because you are banking the wing a little bit, you are turning a little bit. If you're turning left, hopefully the core is on your left a little bit, so you've got some wiggle room there, and you're just trying to kind of flatten it out. And I guess we've got video, you can kind of see it. My shoulders are almost banked back in, but my right hip's going out a little bit down. But it's not,
it's subtle.
I'm a kayaker, right? It's a kayaking thing. It's just keeping your boat straight. It's just
It's interesting because what you say there,
exactly.
It is subtle, and it goes against what is essentially the standard industry lesson that Kelly Farina says, that your proper thermaling body position is with your head on level with the inside riser. And I think in general, when you're learning, that is the best, easiest, that's like your best bet. And things do change a lot between a 3-liner and a 2-liner. Like things change.
Yes,
it's a different craft. And so I don't want to get too mired into this, like just CCC and just E&D gliders, but just to hear that you have a different mechanical technique than I do is very interesting to me. But
super interesting. Yeah.
But we're already we're getting close to our time here, but I want to there's one more thing that's so important in thermaling, and I have coined it. It's something that I have called threshold. It is, at what climb rate do I leave? At what climb rate do I turn for? If I'm on glide and I start getting beeps, when do I go from gliding to thermaling? And this might be in gliding and this might be in thermaling. This is where gliding and thermaling overlap. So tell me how you think about threshold as I've coined it here. Like, what is strong enough to turn in, and when is it time to leave?
Absolutely. Both those things depend almost 100% on what the objective is. Are you in a comp? Are you XC? My threshold's going to be a lot lower if I'm XC, if I'm in the lower third of the sky. If I am not feeling very comfortable about getting to a better climb, even if it's in the heat of the day when I've been in fours, I might take a 3, right? I might go against what we're always told. If it's a 4-meter day, only stop in fours. In a comp, if you turn in something, if you take one too many turns or a turn in something that's not positioned at the day, if you're in a good part of the sky, you've just blown your comp. And that's a pretty hard, one turn is, you've made one turn too many. And, so if you're in a comp, your objective should be more along the lines of what Kriegel has trained really hard to do, which is never turn.
Yeah.
And so when to leave to me is pretty easy in a comp scenario. If you're at the top of the gaggle and you're controlling the gaggle, then you can pull people. The only time to not leave then is if you leave too early and the climbs have been better, then you're going to get leapfrogged. In other words, if you leave and people don't follow you, then you've just blown it. But you basically leave at the top of the climb, or when everybody else leaves and you're in a good position to stay on top of them, or at least in a position where at the end of the next glide, you're not going to be coming in way below them. So, in other words, if you're lower and everybody above you is climbing and they go, if I'm 100 meters below them and we're pretty tall, I'm going to go. I could just not fly as much bar and pick them out of the sky as I go and get to the end of that glide with them. If I'm 300 meters below, I'm probably going to need to climb more and not get antsy and get up to where they are and try to start pulling them in. But in general, I think what we learn as newer pilots holds pretty true. It depends on the time and the quality of the day. And, but like Russ Ogden says, if there's a climb in front of you and you can see it and you can get there and it's better, you don't turn. The only thing you might do is get off bar a little bit, maybe get your B's a little bit, just slow things down and dolphin through that a little bit, but you'd never think about turning in it. And you get to that next climb. So a lot of it is dependent on the sky, the day, the time of the day, the quality of the day. And these are all things that I need to get a lot more hang glider pilots on the show because they're pretty good at it.
Yeah.
We just heard from Johnny Durand a couple weeks ago on the show, and he's taken up paragliding. After 20 years of hang gliding, it's really kind of a COVID thing. It's just something new to do, and it really burnt him in the beginning because he kept going for climbs that he couldn't get to because the speed difference. And so that's a big part of the equation is how safe is your position, how controlling is your position, how dominant is your position.
Yeah, it's so interesting hearing you say this because I think that it's difficult to talk about something like thermaling and give people really meaty, tangible things. It's like
It
basically what
is.
you have to start with is like Kelly Farina tells you to like weight shift your head onto the inside riser and turn 90 degrees every 4 seconds. That's pretty much all we can do. You know, there's
Yep.
like some rules of thumb, like when it gets stronger, you turn more, and when it gets weaker, you turn less. And it's just like, I don't know what else to say mechanically other than that. And your answer perfectly epitomizes what is the answer for pretty much most paragliding questions, and especially thermaling questions, which the answer is it depends.
It depends.
It just
Yeah,
depends. And so that's why I think that a book like this is so good to have sitting on my coffee table, because the longer I can spend being acquainted with these concepts and these tips from these really high level pilots, and the more I can fly, it just takes time to integrate it. It takes
yeah,
time to integrate it.
it really does. And it's, a lot of it is experimentation. We've got Aaron Duragati in the book quite a bit. And, he's, I think, the only pilot to have won 2 super finals. And, obviously amazing pilot, ex-ops pilot 5 times now, and great acro pilot, speed pilot, and climber. And he's a proper alpinist, and he's got a good head. And, he talked about that when he first started doing comps, he had to learn how to stick with the gaggle. And that's what we all have to do. We have to learn how to fly as good as the gaggle and stay with them, have the discipline to stay with them, which is hard. It's very hard to do. And then he realized, well, I need to learn how to win tasks. I can't do it by sticking with the gaggle. So now I have to spend a lot of time racing out front, like Yasin still does every comp he goes to. That's just his style. It's awesome. But you're going to bomb out doing a lot of that. And your ego is just going to get pummeled. And so, but he had to do that for a few years. And then, he was able to do both. He had the knowledge of and the ability to stay with the gaggle, the best in the world, and he had the ability to break away. And he learned that through failure after failure after failure. So yeah, it's time.
It is time. Okay, well, speaking of time, this has been a great jam on thermaling. The next subject that we're going to discuss in the next video is gliding, which is another dark art.
Oh
And
God, that's a tough one.
it is a tough one, but I'm stoked for it. Thank you.
Thanks for having me, buddy. Can't wait.